I remember that afternoon so clearly. The office was noisy, the smell of coffee and printer ink in the air, and I was just about to eat the lunch my daughter-in-law had packed for me. When I opened the lid, I noticed tiny white crystals, sparkling along the rim like sugar. I laughed. Sabrina must have been half asleep this morning, I said to myself. She's always trying too hard to please everyone. I carried the lunchbox to my colleague, Alan Reyes, who used to be a doctor before joining my perfume company. "Look, Alan," I joked. "My daughter-in-law accidentally sugared her husband's food. Maybe she wants him sweeter." But Alan didn't laugh. He tilted the box under the light, rubbed the edge gently with his finger, and his expression changed in an instant. His face turned pale, his voice low. "Mrs. Evelyn, take Lucas to the hospital right now." My smile faded. "What are you talking about?" Alan looked at me, eyes trembling with urgency. "I can't explain now. Just trust me. If I'm right, your son's life depends on it." My hands went cold. I didn't even pack up my things. I called Mr. Whitaker, our driver, and clutched the lunchbox in a plastic bag as if it were a ticking bomb as the car raced through the streets of Washington, D.C. The world outside blurred into light and noise. All I could see was my son's face, the way he'd smiled that morning, the way he'd said, "Don't worry, Mom, I'm fine." And that's when I realized nothing would ever be fine again. Not every sweetness is love. Some sugars are poison disguised as care. If you're listening to this story, I want you to take a deep breath, because what I'm about to tell you didn't start with anger or hate. It started with love, and I truly believed my family was perfect. That Monday morning in our house in Washington, D.C., everything was beautifully ordinary. The sound of pots and pans from the kitchen, the smell of coffee mixing with the faint trace of perfume samples I'd been testing on the dining table. It all blended into the melody of a normal life. My name is Evelyn Hart. I've spent 30 years building a perfume brand from scratch, my life's work, my second child. And my only real child is Lucas. He's 34, a managing director at a financial firm, confident-driven, and the reason I wake up every morning with purpose. In the kitchen that day, Sabrina, my daughter-in-law, was preparing lunch for both of us. She looked radiant, her hair tied neatly back, laughing on the phone with her friends while stirring something on the stove. I remember thinking, she's like the daughter I never had. When she handed me my lunchbox, she said with a smile, "Eat well, Mom. Eating out isn't safe anymore." Her voice was gentle, the kind that melts worry before it forms. I smiled back, proud of the family I had raised, the peace I had built. I didn't know that behind that same smile, my world was already cracking. If you've ever trusted someone so completely, tell me in the comments. Where are you listening from? Because stories like this, they reach further than we imagine. The ride to the hospital felt endless. Outside, Washington streets were alive with noise, yellow cabs, vendors shouting the hum of a city too busy to notice one woman breaking apart inside a car. I sat in the back seat, clutching the plastic bag. Inside it, the lunchbox sat quietly innocent, ordinary, deadly. Every few seconds, I whispered to myself, "Please let Alan be wrong. Please, God." When I arrived at the University of Maryland Medical Center, I walked straight to the reception desk, my hands shaking. A nurse with glasses looked up startled. "I need someone to test this food," I said. "It might be dangerous." For a moment, she hesitated. Then her phone rang, and it was Alan on the line. Within minutes, they rushed the sample to the lab. I was asked to wait. Waiting is cruel when you're a mother. Every tick of the clock becomes a hammer in your chest. I thought about Lucas, his laughter, his voice, the way he kissed my cheek before leaving that morning. And then I remembered the last few months, how often he'd complained about fatigue, how pale he looked, how I'd brushed it off as stress. My mind began to piece things together, and for the first time, I felt a chill crawl down my spine. After what felt like hours, Dr. Julian Park appeared. He was calm, but his eyes carried the weight of something terrible. "Mrs. Hart," he said quietly, "the substance on that food rim is arsenic." The word cut through the air like a blade. Arsenic. I'd heard it in crime documentaries, never in real life. He continued, "If your son has been eating food like this for some time, it could be fatal." My knees gave out. I gripped the edge of the chair to stay upright. My mind screamed, why, who would do this? But my heart already knew there was only one person who touched his meals. That night, I went home carrying a truth I didn't want to face. Love had turned poisonous, and the poison had a name: Sabrina. I left the hospital in silence. The city outside still glowed golden in the late afternoon sun, but to me, it looked colorless. Every sound, traffic, laughter, the faint hum of the radio in the car faded into a hollow echo. I sat in the back seat with the lunchbox still in my lap. How strange I thought that something meant to feed could instead destroy. And how cruel that the hands that prepared it were the same hands that once called me Mom. When I got home, I couldn't walk straight into the kitchen. I passed by the counter, where Sabrina usually cooked, her apron still hanging there, the faint smell of her perfume in the air. I wanted to believe it was all a mistake, that the arsenic was from some contamination, not intent, that Sabrina was incapable of such evil. But mothers know when the world changes around them, when safety turns to fear. That night, I didn't sleep. At dawn, I drove to my attorney, Martin Hale, a man who had managed my estate for over 20 years. He looked surprised to see me. "Mrs. Hart, you don't have an appointment." I sat down anyway. "Martin, I need to see my will, right now." He hesitated, then brought out a thick folder. I turned the pages with trembling hands. Properties, shares, assets, and then there it was, the clause that froze my blood. If Mr. Lucas Hart deceases before the testator, his wife, Mrs. Sabrina Cole, shall inherit the entirety of the estate. I looked up at Martin. "So if Lucas dies before me, she gets everything," he nodded solemnly. "Yes, unless you change it. The company, the properties, all of it would go to her." The room spun. Suddenly, every smile, every gentle act of kindness from Sabrina replayed in my mind. But they felt different now, calculated, hollow. On the drive home, I caught my reflection in the car window. I looked older, not from time, but from betrayal. That was the day I stopped asking why and started asking how to protect my son from the woman he trusted most. I spent that night staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, the quiet ticking of the old clock in the hallway. For the first time in years, I was afraid to sleep, afraid that if I closed my eyes, I'd lose my son before morning. By dawn, I had made up my mind. I wouldn't wait for another tragedy to happen under my own roof. I reached for an old number on my phone. Detective Nolan Pierce, a man I'd met years ago during a corporate security case. When he answered, his voice was calm, but alert. "Mrs. Hart, what's going on?" I told him everything. The lunchbox, the arsenic, the will. Every word tasted bitter. When I finished, there was a long silence on the line. Then he said, "We'll set a trap. You must act normal. Let her think you still trust her." Those words became my armor. That afternoon, I called Martin Hale again. I made sure to speak loudly, knowing Sabrina could hear me from the living room. "Martin, I've decided to change my will," I said clearly. "I'll donate most of my fortune to a foundation for orphaned children." I want nothing left behind for greed to fight over. I didn't have to turn around to know she heard it. The clinking of her teacup stopped midair. Detective Pierce had already arranged for hidden cameras inside the kitchen, disguised as air vents, and a clock. He told me, the moment she acts, we'll be ready. That evening, I walked past Sabrina in the hallway. She smiled sweetly. Mom, dinner will be ready soon. I made Lucas's favorite soup. Her tone was perfect, warm, natural. But her eyes, they flickered for a second too long. I smiled back, forcing calm into my voice. Thank you, dear. You always take such good care of us. But inside, I was breaking, because I knew that tonight, in the same kitchen that once smelled of love and laughter, I was about to watch the truth unfold, spoonful by spoonful. Love had turned into a test, and I was ready to find out who would survive it. The next morning, I met Detective Pierce in a small surveillance room downtown. On the wall, a screen showed a live feed of my kitchen, the same kitchen that once smelled like love and comfort. Now it was a stage, a quiet, deadly stage. We sat in silence as the footage rolled. There she was, Sabrina. Hair tied neatly apron on, humming softly while she cooked. She opened a small glass vial, tilted it carefully, and sprinkled a white powder into the simmering pot. Not sugar, not salt, something else. Her face didn't flinch. No guilt, no hesitation, only precision. Like someone performing a routine they'd done many times before. I felt my chest tighten. My fingernails dug into the edge of the table until I felt the sting of my own skin. I wanted to storm into that kitchen, to scream. How could you? But Pierce put a hand on my shoulder. Not yet, he said quietly. Let her finish. We need proof. When the recording ended, the air in the room felt heavy, like grief itself had taken shape. I stared at the frozen image of her face on the screen. The daughter-in-law I'd loved was a stranger now. Pierce turned to me. We have enough to arrest her. But to make sure she can't deny it, we'll need one more move. He paused. A final act that will make her confess. That's when he explained the plan, the most painful decision I'd ever have to make. Lucas would fake his death. It would be the only way to catch Sabrina off guard, to make her believe she had succeeded. Only then, Pierce said, would her mask truly fall. That night, I told Lucas everything. He listened in silence, his hands trembling slightly. When I finished, he took a deep breath and said, If this saves you, Mom, I'll do it. I wanted to say no, to shield him like I did when he was 5, when a scraped knee felt like the end of the world. But this time, the wound wasn't on his skin, it was in his heart. That night, I stood by his door and whispered a prayer. Because tomorrow, my son would die so that he could live again. That evening, our home smelled of soup again. It was almost poetic. The same scent that once meant warmth now carried a hidden promise of death. Sabrina moved around the kitchen like a dancer who knew every step. She smiled at me. Dinner's ready, Mom. I made Lucas's favorite. Lucas sat across the table, his face pale but steady. He glanced at me once, that silent signal between a mother and her son that says, I'm ready. We began to eat, or at least pretended to. Lucas lifted his spoon, took a small sip, then set it down, pressing his hand to his stomach. He groaned softly. Mom, I don't feel well. And then he collapsed. The sound of the chair falling echoed like thunder through the dining room. I screamed his name, my voice shaking so violently it barely sounded human. Lucas! Oh my God! Lucas! Sabrina rushed forward, kneeling beside him, grabbing his hand. Her tears came fast, almost too fast. But then I saw it, the flicker of something dark in her eyes. Relief. Satisfaction. She whispered under her breath, Finally. I turned away so she wouldn't see my face. My hands shook as I dialed 911, though the number led straight to Detective Pierce's undercover team. Within minutes, the siren wailed outside. When the paramedics arrived, Sabrina tried to climb into the ambulance. I'm his wife. I need to be there. But I stopped her, placing a trembling hand on her arm. No, dear. Let me go. I'll call you as soon as I know anything. Her grip loosened. Her eyes darted nervously. For the first time, she looked unsure. Inside the ambulance, Lucas lay still on the stretcher. I sat beside him, holding his cold hand, whispering so softly, only he could hear. You were perfect, my son. You were brave. At the University of Maryland Medical Center, the plan was in motion. Dr. Laura Chen was already waiting, preparing a fake file with a false diagnosis, cardiac arrest caused by toxic ingestion. Hidden cameras lined the room. Machines beeped softly, showing no heartbeat. Lucas looked lifeless. Too lifeless. I sat beside him, the tears finally falling for real. Even though I knew it was pretend, seeing my child like that tore me apart, in a way words could never describe. When the message went out, Lucas' heart pronounced dead. At 9:34 p.m., Sabrina arrived within 40 minutes. Her makeup was smudged, her eyes red. She clung to me, sobbing loudly. Mom? No. It can't be true. I didn't answer. I just led her into the room. Lucas lay motionless beneath a white sheet. Sabrina leaned close, touching his hand. Her lips trembled, and then she whispered the words that ended everything. Finally, it's over. The hidden microphone caught every syllable. At that exact moment, Lucas opened his eyes. Sabrina screamed, the sound piercing through the sterile air. Detective Pierce stepped into the room. Sabrina Cole, you're under arrest for attempted murder. Her body collapsed to the floor, her face pale as paper. And I just stood there, frozen, realizing that justice, when it finally arrives, doesn't roar. It whispers. The police took Sabrina away that night. Her cries echoed down the hospital corridor. Part guilt, part fear, part something darker I still can't name. Detective Pierce stood quietly beside me as the door closed. It's over, he said. But I didn't feel victory, only a quiet ache. The next few weeks passed in slow motion. Lucas recovered under Dr. Chen's care. The traces of arsenic in his body faded, though the memories did not. Sometimes I'd walk into his room and see him staring out the window, not broken, just changed. Pain does that to people. It carves away the noise, leaves only what's real. Meanwhile, the news spread like wildfire. Wife arrested for poisoning husband in inheritance scheme. They turned our tragedy into headlines, into noise. But in my heart, it was never about scandal. It was about survival. When the investigation ended, I did something that surprised even myself. I kept my promise. The foundation I had only mentioned to trap her, I made it real. The Evelyn Foundation for women who've suffered betrayal, manipulation, or violence in their own homes. Every dollar, every ounce of energy I had left went there. Because I wanted the pain she caused to build something good. One evening, Lucas and I sat on the balcony watching the sunset over Washington, D.C. The sky was burning gold, and for the first time in months, I could breathe. He reached for my hand and whispered, "Mom, you saved me." I smiled softly. "No, son. You saved yourself. I just lit the way." He leaned against my shoulder like he used to as a boy, and in that small, quiet moment, I forgave her. Not because she deserved it, but because I deserved peace. I tell this story, not for revenge, but for every mother who's ever loved too deeply, trusted too easily, and found courage too late. Because love, even when poisoned, can still be healed by truth. If you've listened this far, tell me in the comments, would you stay silent to keep the peace or speak up to save the truth? Wherever you are, remember, courage always leads to better days.